earlier the week, radio voice of the Reds, Tommy Thrall, gave us some time. Elliot asked him a question regarding the future of Elly De La Cruz and, of course, getting a contract extension done. Here's what Tommy Thrall had to say. Take a look.
Too much. Do you think that there will be a chance the Reds sign Elly De La Cruz in the near future?
Sure, if you can loan him $1 billion, I think there's a great chance they could do it. Yeah, go ahead.
Tommy, we can defer it. We'll pay you $1 billion in 2075.
Absolutely. Yeah, perfect. You know what? I think I think we all want to see that happen. And I'm sure there's nobody that wants to see it happen more than Nick Krall. If something happens in the game to where the economic situation changed drastically between now and Elly's free agency, then there's a chance. I mean, realistically, I don't necessarily see it happening. And maybe I'll be wrong. I hope that I am, but given who his agent is and how his agent operates, it's going to be tough. The one thing that I think we all have to do, and trust me, I do it too. Watching this guy, he's a legend in the making, and you just kind of have to appreciate every day that you get to watch him in a Reds uniform. It's true of every player, regardless of whether they spend their whole career with a team or not. At some point, it all comes to an end. So you just kind of have to appreciate it. But here's the thing about a guy like Elly.
So we've had this discussion on this show before. You know, what's the likelihood that the Reds are going to be able to afford Elly De La Cruz? I mean, this fan base and, baseball lost its mind when the Cincinnati Reds over 10 years ago gave Joey Votto $225 million for 10 years. And everyone thought, man, the Reds can't recover from that. It's going to be a hair above $225 or whatever it is $1 million to keep Elly De La Cruz in Cincinnati. We've all had our doubts. The bottom line is we know we have him now. Look, everything is about, we keep jumping ahead to the year that we're going to lose Elly, if we lose Elly as Reds fans, this, that, and the other. But when you asked Tommy that, were you expecting that answer, Elliot? Were you actually expecting him to say, yeah, no, I don't see it happening either? Like, we all say this and we doubt it and we always feel a certain way about it. But when you hear someone like Tommy Thrall say it, that's a real kick in the pants.
When I asked it, I was hoping for the coach speak answer, which is you feed him something along the lines we're gonna see what happens. Hopefully it does, stuff like that. But I think it's probably better that he was truthful, and I think it's the situation that the Reds are in. You're not able to pay players, and it sucks. But that's who the Cincinnati Reds are. Under this current ownership group, that's what it is. Joey Votto's the highest paid contract in franchise history. He got paid $20 million, and $20 million a year. It's like that's not a top 25 contract in today's MLB. I don't see a world where the Reds re-sign him. I would love them to, and if you were going to, it would certainly have to be now. It would have to be in these next 1 or 2 years. You can't wait until the end, obviously, because by then I do think he'll be an MVP caliber player. Not that he already isn't, but I just think that's the world of Major League Baseball. And to be fair and Tommy said it, if you enjoy Elly every single day, because we still have Elly for a while. We still have Elly for like 4 more years, 5 more years, whatever it is, 4 more years. And if you enjoy it in this next window, and this will be our big window as Reds fans, at least mine, in my lifetime, this will probably be the biggest push I've seen for the Reds to try to make the playoffs, try to get a run. If you think about it like that and say this is our time, and everything outside of our time, we'll worry about that later. That's just how I'm going to have to operate my brain. It's tough for me to come to the realization that the Royals, they're able to get their guy, and other organizations are able to get their guy. I don't know if we're going to be able to get this guy. But I love watching Elly De La Cruz. I'm hoping that Terry Francona in these next 3 years are going to be able to get something going here in Cincinnati. If not, then to be quite honest, it might never happen. So at that point, what are we even talking about?
I think that I go back and forth on what the Reds should do with the Reds. Does it surprise me that Tommy Thrall said that it's likely that they won't sign him to a Bobby Witt-style contract? No, it doesn't surprise me at all. But let me ask this question. You have Elly De La Cruz till 2030. That's the first time he can be a free agent. 5 years from now. You got 5 more years of Elly De La Cruz. If you sign him to a Bobby Witt style contract where you lock him up for 10 years and you front load that contract where I think you're only paying Elly $1 million for the next 2 years, and he goes to arbitration for the 3 after that, where he's going to be making about 20 if he continues on the rise that he's getting. What happens if in 5 years you sign Elly to this 10-year deal, 10-year, $400 million, whatever it is, $350 million, and you front load it and you give him more money now, knowing that you're getting a deal on the back end? What happens is if in 2030 you're not competitive at all, similar to what happened with Joey Votto, right? They signed Joey Votto to that long extension at the end of kind of their run, and they're like, all right, well, we'll do this and we'll keep it going. Well, all of a sudden, you're looking at the back 5 years of that Elly De La Cruz contract where you're paying him $40 million a year, and you're like, we're a 70-win team. This contract no longer makes a whole lot of sense. You don't want to do that either. And no one's going to want to take on Elly De La Cruz's contract for 5 years, $200 million or whatever it be at the end of that contract. So you're taking a gamble right now saying, hey, we got 5 years to get this thing done. We've got 5 years to really compete with this superstar athlete. And I will say this, and my advice to fans is don't dread 2030. Don't look at it as like, we got to get it done by 2030. Some Bengals fans do this. Well, we got to get it done by Joe Burrow's current contract or else it's not going to happen and yada, yada, yada. Don't look at that. Just enjoy the time. That's 5 years. Push it off. Have that misery 5 years down the line. But for right now, just enjoy what you got.
Yeah, that's the thing, too. Like, so by the time we get to 2030, we're already heading into year 3 with Elly De La Cruz. So hopefully we're not having these same conversations heading into 2030 where we need to get an extension so we could win with him. By the time we get to that point, let's be clear, if the Reds haven't found a way to win with him by the time we get to that point, do they deserve Elly De La Cruz past 2030? Because this idea that we're just playing with house money until they get that extension done, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Spending all this time on how do we keep Elly for the future instead of that's my biggest problem with baseball, especially, or at least with how we talk about the Reds. Everything's about the future, the future, the future. Hey, we really need some depth in this lineup at the trade deadline. We're only a couple games out. We need to make a trade to go bolster this lineup. Well, we can't touch the prospects because the future, the future, the future. Well, the guys that are winning for us now, that we're trying to add depth pieces to help them win now, at one point years ago, we were told we can't touch them because of the future, the future, the future. The future is now. You have Elly now. You have him for 5 more years, but we're more worried about the 10 years after those 5 years than we are about the next 5 years. We should be talking about what this team could do with him now. You know, the fact that you go and you get Terry Francona to be the manager of a team that is highlighted by a star player, Elly De La Cruz, like this, like, the opportunity is here, and what the Reds do with it in 5. If the Reds can't capitalize in the next 5 years as far as winning, to your point, what the hell's the point of signing him for another 10 years? If you've proven you can't win with him for the first 7 to 8 years that you've had him, what makes us think that they could figure it out for the next 10 years after?
Well, and that's the point. I saw Elliot talking with people in the chat about this. Is like, if you're not, and this is a good point. If you're not going to try and get Elly now, if you're not going to try now, then when the heck are you? I'll ask simply this question. If you extend Elly De La Cruz now and you give him $40 million a year now, that's $40 million that you could be using to improve the roster. That's money that you could be allocating other places. Guys like, I know we can make fun of these signings that they made last year, but guys like Candelario and guys like Nick Martinez this offseason, where you're giving these guys money to help the roster now when Elly De La Cruz only cost $1 million. Like, that is ways that you can be more competitive now. I think that signing Elly De La Cruz to a 10-year contract, although it locks up your superstar for a long time, does make you a little less competitive right now.
And again, I'm going to try not to be as.
There's the smirk.
I
there
know.
it is.
I know.
There
I'm
it is.
negative.
There's
I
the
know I'm
smirk.
negative. The $40 million that you're talking about, realistically, I don't trust the organization to use that money and spend it right. I just won't, and I'm sorry. And it's even if we did spend that money right, it's still not enough. It's not enough. And if you're not going to be in on Elly De La Cruz. If you're not going to be in on Elly De La Cruz, this player, if you're not going to win with this team and this young group of guys, my question to you would be, when would we? When does the winning start? And I know it's a bad way to look at it as a fan, and I know I'm negative. That's just the way I operate, and we can try to find the little wins, right? We'll try to find the little wins in each season. It's just not how I want to fan, and I've made that very clear. And it's okay if people want to fan the other way. If people want to get very excited right now, be very excited. This is your team. This is the most excited we've been as Reds fans to have a generational superstar like this. It's the first time in a very, very long time. So enjoy this. But my question to you would be, if you're not going to sign Elly, if you're not going to go all in on Elly De La Cruz, there's not another player on this planet. There's not another player that we could hope to raise in that farm system. There's not another player that we could hope to pay as a veteran free agent that would be worth it. I mean, Elly De La Cruz is the Cincinnati Reds as of right now.
But you have him for 5 years. So what I'm
Sure.
saying, what I'm saying
4 years
is,
and then trade.
okay, well, that is the negative fan coming out. But yeah,
That's the truth.
You're right.
You're talking about saving $40 million. If I have either let 5 years and let Elly walk for free,
you're probably right. If at the end of Elly De La Cruz's tenure on the Reds, like the six year stretch that you have with them, if at the end they're not competitive, yeah, they're going to trade him at the trade deadline in 2029, 2030, whenever that is. But it's just in terms of being more competitive, it is more advantageous to not extend Elly De La Cruz right now. Like that's just more money that you can work
for a small market team.
Well, period. Like if you were a big market team, that's $40 million that you're not giving to your shortstop.
I would argue that Steve Cohen doesn't give a damn how much he pays Juan Soto. That's my argument. I'm not saying it's right or just. That's just the way it is in Major League Baseball. The best owners in the sport are going to pay you no matter what you're worth, no matter what you can spend elsewhere. They pay the best players available.
When the Reds went out and got Terry Francona, and you have Elly De La Cruz, I know I keep bringing these two up because it would have been special just to have Terry Francona without Elly if he didn't exist, and have Elly without Terry Francona if the other wasn't an option there. But the fact that you have both together, it just screams that this team is trying to put something together, but their actions during the offseason aren't really reflecting that. What's the point of bringing Terry Francona in? What's the point of getting an extension with Elly De La Cruz done if you are not trying to put a competitor out on that field? I don't know if I go to the YMCA to play noon ball, and I walk in, I see a guy that has the headband, and he has the arm sleeve, and he has like the newest Jordans, and I'm like, oh, that guy could play. And then we start playing and realize he can't play. It's like, well, then why'd you do all that? Why'd you put the headband on? Why'd you put the sleeve on? Why'd you spend all that money on those shoes when you can't play? That's how that's the Reds. The Reds walk into the gym with the headband on and the sleeve and the newest Jordans, and then it's time to play, and it's like, oh, you can't ball. Like, you can't play. What's the point? What's the point of getting Terry Francona? What's the point of trying to extend Elly De La Cruz if you're not going to do the little things in between to maximize the efforts of all those? That's my frustration and hope that this isn't smoke and mirrors. I don't want to be distracted by, oh, cool, look how entertaining Terry Francona is in interviews. Oh, cool, look, another steal for Elly De La Cruz. Oh, cool, another October where we're not talking about the Reds in the postseason.
Yeah, I get it. I certainly understand, and it is unfortunate that this is the way that small market teams have to operate. But that is kind of what teams do. Like, right? You look at the Cleveland Guardians. They had to let their superstar shortstop walk. They had to let Frankie Lindor go elsewhere. The Cleveland Guardians have had 3 or 4 Cy Young Award winners that they brought up in their farm system walk out the door. That's just what they do. They win a Cy Young and they shake their hand and say, we thank you for your service, and they keep on going. And to their credit, they continue to win because they continue to develop, and that's just the hand that they're dealt. And we could sit here and complain that we don't have the same, though the Reds don't have the same ownership group as Steve Cohen, that they don't have the same ownership group as the Steinbrenners in New York, that they don't have the same ownership group as Magic Johnson and the Los Angeles Dodgers. But that's just where you're at. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense continually going, hey, why can't we do this? Why can't we do this? Why can't we be the Mets? Why can't we be the Dodgers? We know that we can't be them, and we know it's not going to change, so why complain about it? You've got to figure out, hey, how can we be a competitive team as frequently as possible? Or, hey, how can we be the most competitive team right now when we have these young stars under their rookie contract? And I think part of that is, hey, I know it makes sense to lock up these guys for 10 years. I know it makes sense to get Elly De La Cruz for a 10-year, $400 million, $375 million contract, but that's for the next 3 years. That's money that you could be using, allocating towards your team. And maybe that's far-fetched to think that the Reds will do that. They'll take, instead of, hey, we're not going to pay Elly De La Cruz $40 million now because we got him on a $1 million contract for the next 2 years, and we're going to use that money elsewhere, but that's how they've got to operate.
Is that kind of how Bengals fans, like with the Jesse Bates situation, like, understood, like, you don't want to lose Jesse Bates, but like maybe there was an understanding that the money that you didn't use to keep Jesse Bates was going to be allocated elsewhere and expected more and didn't get that? Is it kind of like that thinking to it? It's a little different, but similar thinking?
Well, quickly, the thought process behind Jesse Bates was that he plays at a non-luxury position, a position that you can get cheaper value and still get pretty good play. Obviously, that didn't work out. I will give the Bengals front office credit because every single other guy that they've let walked, I think, has worked out other than Jesse Bates. But, yeah, that's essentially the thought is, hey, we're going to use this money elsewhere. They used it towards Sam Hubbard and Jermaine Pratt and Logan Wilson, which didn't work out for them. But we'll see what happens.
Casey was a big fan of letting Jesse Bates go, right? Weren't you the one screaming, let him go, let him go?
I think you're misremembering that. I was on the other side of that conversation.
My bad.
I'll give Casey credit. He changed my mind on the whole Jesse Bates thing because I fought that fight as good as I could for the longest time. And then Casey looked at me one day, and he just very calmly, with his beard and his glasses, looked at me in his soft voice and says, I just wish the Bengals wouldn't let elite players walk out the door. And I was like, huh. Yeah. That was a good rationale. So he changed my mind with that simple phrase.
You know, if off the bench is around for the next 5 years, can you imagine every day there's going to be a segment on what should the Bengals do with T. Higgins and what should the Reds do with Elly De La Cruz? Do you think those topics will exist? How long do you think those topics are going to exist?
Well, I can tell you how long Elly De La Cruz is, till 2030. Then we'll probably have some new topics, some other. Cam Collier. What are we going to do with Cam Collier and Sal Stewart?
Well, maybe they can have like a shakeup, and the Reds can get like another name that can be listed with Elly, and then you have two names.
Yeah,
to talk
like
about.
the Guardians, what made it easier, like the blow of losing Francisco Lindor made it a little bit easier when you had Ramirez that they paid right after, which we looked at the numbers last year. I said, man, if you would have paid Ramirez and Francisco Lindor, the Guardians would have had the 19th highest payroll in baseball. Like, that's still not even that high of a payroll. Like, you actually technically could have afforded both, which is wild, but that's not they win, so can't really argue it. The Reds, if you lose,
they develop. And they're very good at it.
The Reds, when you move on from Elly and we're right back to what we are, it's going to be hard to defend that.
Let me say this point blank right now when we talk about the Reds' woes, where they're at right now. The reason that the Reds are in the position that they're in right now, to where it looks like they can blossom, or I guess I should say the reason that the Reds didn't win over the last 10 years wasn't because they didn't spend money. It's because they didn't have good prospects. They drafted very poorly in the early 2010s and developed very poorly in the mid-2010s. It had nothing to do with, hey, we didn't spend enough money. It was quite literally because all the prospects, they didn't have Matt McClains and Elly De La Cruz's and Hunter Greens coming up at that time. And that's why they're at the position where they are, where it feels like they can compete, to where if they win the National League Central, I don't think it surprised many people in baseball.
Yeah, also not capitalizing like on the trade value, like waiting a year too late to move on from guys like obviously Todd Frazier and Jay Bruce and guys like that. They didn't capitalize on those prospects either.